You're here now to debate it. Former presidential writer for President George W. Bush, Ned Ryun, and Democratic strategist Mike Morey. Guys, thanks so much for coming on this morning. We appreciate it. Mike, we're going to start with you. There's some holdouts here. There's about 6 of them in the GOP as far as the Senate plan goes. The big thing that I think a lot of people are worried about is raising taxes on people when this is supposed to be a tax cut. And that's where you get into the local and the state deduction. And the plan to get rid of that deduction could spike taxes on a lot of people that aren't rich by any stretch of the imagination. Can this thing get through with that deduction being taken out, or does it have to stay in place?
Look, I think what folks are talking about this in the context of blue states and red states, when in fact what folks should be talking about is purple congressional districts. The fact of the matter is that Republicans controlled the House, the Republicans controlled the Senate, in large part because of in the last election you saw massive waves in suburban districts. It's the suburbs in particular that are going to be most impacted by this. And so when we talk about whether it's sort of building off of, rewarding red states or penalizing blue states, at the end of the day, if you pass a bill that's going to take away that deductibility from these swing congressional districts, then you're going to put your House majority in significant trouble. And I think at the end of the day, if you want to see a bill passed, they're going to have to reconcile that.
Yeah, I mean, it's designed to be a tax cut, and it's not going to be for a lot of people. Let's look at the 6 GOP Senate holdouts. They're holding out for an array of reasons, but let's bring up the list. You've got, starting from the top left, there's Ron Johnson. You got Bob Corker, John McCain, Jeff Flake, Susan Collins, Rand Paul. This is many more than they can afford to lose in the Senate because it's pretty tight right now. Ned, over to you. The design of this thing to bring business back to the country sounds great, to drop the corporate rate to 20%. But how do you do that without giving a big tax hike to the middle class if you're going to try and keep this thing deficit neutral?
Well, I mean, this is the great conundrum, Rob, and Republicans have once again shown that, if they were playing football and got the ball on the 20-yard line and the defense left the field, they'd still throw an interception. I think the thing that they've got to figure out in regards to the SALT issue is I don't think you can you can remove that deduction completely. I think they've got to probably have a clause in there where they sunset it and say in 2 years we'll kick in the SALT deduction to allow the states to be able to respond not only with their budgets but also for the people that reside in those states. But Ron Johnson is really throwing a fit because they've taken the 25% pass-through small business tax that the House plan has and raised it to 30%. And I think that's unacceptable, and Ron Johnson thinks so as well. Bob Corker's mentioned making the personal and small business tax cuts temporary is unacceptable. So they've got to fix, I think, in my mind, 4 things. They've got to deal with the SALT issue. They've got to put that small business tax back to 25%. They've got to make it permanent. They've got to make the personal taxes permanent. And they've got to move that corporate tax up to now and not a year from now, Rob. I mean, there's just a lot of problems. And for guys like me to support it, Rob, they've got to close the carried interest loophole. And they've got to stop messing with this real estate depreciation and say just leave it at 39 years and move on, because that right there, even though it's not being discussed, Rob, is costing hundreds of billions of dollars in revenue to Treasury. It's unacceptable.
I can tell Mike wants to respond.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would just add to that as well, as the only permanent thing in this tax cut is a drop of the corporate rate from 35 to 20%. And how do you rationalize to sort of the working class, white middle class voter who went to the dance with Donald Trump and the Republican Congress and then tell them that actually your taxes are going to go up? 50% of your taxes are going to go up in 10 years. The only taxes that stay in place are for the swamp.
But he's trying to say that big picture, we're going to have more jobs, and in the long run, it's going to be better because all these companies, according to their plan, are going to flood back into the country when they see that 20% tax rate.
Unless, of course, you ask Gary Cohen, who he asked CEOs this to their face, asked who was going to invest with these corporate tax rates, tax decreases, and hardly a hand went up in the audience. So I think that's a lot of smoke and mirrors. You better get down to the fact that there will be no permanent cuts for the middle class, working class of this country.
And that is, I mean, I agree, that is the huge problem. And then you also have the individual mandate thing that they were trying to tie in, although the president had a tweet, I think last night or this morning, that said he's probably flexible on allowing the mandate to continue and not removing that. But I just can't, I mean, I've looked at this thing from 1,000 different ways. I cannot find a feasible way that you're going to satisfy all of these people. What do you say?
No, I would argue, Rob, unless people see next year a net noticeable difference in their paychecks, I think Republicans are going to put themselves in an awful position. And so I've explained to people, Republicans have put themselves in a no-win situation right now at this moment. They cannot pass this Senate bill as it now stands. I think there's so many things wrong with it. At the same time, if they don't get some sort of tax reform done before 2018, people are going to start to question, why are Republicans in the majority in Congress if they can't get anything done? And so I would go back to saying also, too, You can't have all these taxes that I think benefit a certain small class of real estate developers and private equity hedge fund guys, and then stick the middle and upper middle class with the bill. It will be devastating to the Republican Party.
I completely agree. I think both portions of this, Senate and House, have big problems, and I don't know how they're going to fix them. But we're optimistic because the administration needs to get something done for the American people. Guys, thank you so much for coming on this morning. We do appreciate it. Jillian, over to you.
Thanks, Rob.